choose. Our next speaker is Meagan Ball. She has a long career in digital content. In her current role, she is the Director of Digital Content for Tribune Media, which is a parent company of 42 TV stations and digital properties. In her day-to-day as the Director of Digital Content, she collaborates with over 200 web producers across 30 newsrooms. So with her experience, I think we have a lot to learn about managing multiple newsrooms and making people happy. So please welcome Meagan.
Thank you. So hi, like Liz said, I'm Meagan Ball, and today I'm talking about how to make everyone happy, or at least as many people as we can, while managing a large network of sites on WordPress.com VIP. So let's see if my thing works. Right, sweet. So yeah, hi, I'm Meagan. I already said that. But I am the Director of Digital Content for Tribune Broadcasting. I've been working in digital media for television stations for 12 years. I've worked with big stations, small stations, and all the stations in between, as well as bad CMS, slightly less bad CMS, and every once in a while good or great CMS. I started out my career as a one-person web department in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and moved up to Kansas City as a web producer for a TV station there. And then I was digital EP, and then I moved up to corporate with what was called local TV then, and now with Tribune. I'm not a developer. I'm a journalist who also happens to like working on product, and I know just enough to be dangerous. I'm one part of the Tribune Media digital team, and you can see us, all of us there on the screen. I helpfully circled myself there. We are more or less entirely a remote team. I'm based out of Kansas City. We've got some people in Chicago, Sacramento, North Carolina, Oklahoma City, Indiana, and Connecticut. And so that means that we communicate amongst ourselves mostly via Slack, and then mostly via GIFs in Slack. So the best place to start to explain how we at Tribune got to great CMS status with WordPress.com VIP and where we are today is by sharing our story. So at Tribune Media, we manage about 50 websites, 130 apps. Of those 50 sites, 42 are television stations, and one is a radio station, WGN Radio. Of those 42 stations, 31 are hosted on WordPress.com VIP. Some of the stations are duopolies that share a website, so sometimes the math doesn't quite add up when you're trying to do it in your head. We also have 5 self-hosted websites, 75 channels of live streaming video, 30 million Facebook fans, and 44% of TV viewers in America live in one of our markets. Tribune Media, as we know it today, came about as a merger between Tribune and the company that I used to work for called Local TV. Tribune owned 20 TV stations and Local TV owned 21. But Local TV and Tribune always had a relationship with Tribune on the technical side before we even merged. So here's kind of like where we were, to kind of get you to understand how we got to where we are today. In 2010, Local TV and Tribune both hosted their sites on a proprietary CMS built by Tribune called P2P. Around 2011, at Local TV, we decided that we wanted something better, and we decided to move our stations off of P2P and move them onto WordPress.com VIP. And in 2012, what we call the Heritage Tribune stations followed suit. 2013 is when Local TV and Tribune merged. So at that time, we had half of our stations on one WordPress.com VIP theme and half of our stations on another. They had different workflows, they had different ways to post stories, they had different ways that they managed their home pages. But about halfway through 2013, we were able to get everyone on the same theme and using the same tools. So a lot of what we ended up with today came from the 2 dates on this timeline in particular, choosing to re-platform ourselves on WordPress.com VIP in 2011, and how we merged the 2 WordPress.com VIP site groups in 2013. So in 2011, when it came time to re-platform, we knew if we wanted to manage the sites effectively, there were some things that we wanted to focus on. We wanted a CMS that was producer-first focused. As a former local television web producer myself, I knew I didn't want the technology to get in the way of producers publishing stories. We wanted them to be focusing on content. We also wanted a template that could be shared across the group, but with realistic expectations for customization. We have stations in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and we have a station in Los Angeles, California. There are reasonably some things between newsroom to newsroom that stay the same, but we also understand that there are times when a station is going to need something more custom. And then also for support purposes, we didn't want 40 different versions of TV sites with 40 different solutions. That picture that I showed a couple slides ago that showed all those people around that table, that's the support team. There's not a group somewhere else that's answering Zendesk tickets. That's all that's there. Lastly, we wanted to, not lastly, we also didn't want to require anyone to be on the road to learn how to use the website, and we wanted to get away from week-long web producer training that came with like a big binder that you had to go through just to figure out how to publish one story. We didn't want to have to do any sort of road shows where we got a bunch of producers and reporters in a room and said like, here's WordPress, because that is never great and it's terrible for new employee onboarding. A lot of reasons why we didn't want to do that. We also wanted to make data-driven decisions for the design of the site so that producers didn't have to spend any time deciding where a story was going to go or like spend their whole afternoon redesigning the sports page or think about what kind of widgets they wanted in the right-hand rail. The majority of the people in our newsrooms are journalists. They're reporters, they're producers, they're web producers. They don't want to spend their time worrying about, like, let me redesign the homepage today so I can see if that gets me a couple more clicks. We wanted to make the right choice for them from the get-go, and all they would have to worry about is publishing great content. Okay, so I think that we made all those things happen. As a group, we're at about 1,800 WordPress users across those 31 sites posted on WordPress.com VIP. Those users are producing about 42,000 articles a month that we deliver to our sites, social networks, and 62 apps that are powered by a custom API. And oh, by the way, we also have done all of this with just one developer and one contract designer. So, obviously we were moving a lot of people's cheese and also attempting to standardize the production of digital across such a large group of sites. So all the decisions we made back then and continue to make now seem to revolve around these 5 topics: editorial workflow, content management, site management, author and user management, and then how we communicate all that to our users. And when I say users, in this context, I'm talking about like our web producers and our producers. So editorial workflow was the most important thing to protect for me. As a former web producer, I wanted publishing content to our sites to be an easy experience so they could focus on that and not on technical issues. We had to recognize that while the broadcast to digital experience is pretty similar across all of our stations, web teams vary in size, number of hours their station does of news a day, and skill level were also all a factor. So to specifically talk about how we manage editorial workflow, I'm going to show you how we use Zoninator, Limply, and our post settings checkboxes. So here's Zoninator. Being able to manage top stories, being able to manage top stories on the homepage wasn't actually a top priority for us in the beginning. For a time, we tried a homepage that just showed the most recently published stories on the homepage because we're like, hey, whatever we published last is the most important thing out there. Like, we're not going to spend a lot of time trying to rearrange it. People just want to flow in news. And if you've spent any time in a newsroom, you can imagine that like the web producers and the news directors did not really like that idea. They want to be able to manage the stories that they think are most important to the people in their community. And there's a lot of logic behind that. You don't always want your morning show recipe to be the top story on your homepage if there's like another big story going on. So we introduced something called the Top Story Zone using the Zoninator plugin. It manages an 11-story block on the homepage where web producers can arrange the top stories in any order that they like. This is about the most design that we ask the producers to do, just by deciding where to place stories where they are in Zoninator, and then after those 11 stories, it just starts to post as the most recently published story. Kind of an interesting side story about Zoninator is this is also how we used to power the front page of the apps. But then we found that obviously people don't use apps the same way that they use desktop, and web producers were setting up their Zoninator the way they wanted it for the day and then kind of leaving it for a couple hours, and people would get on the app and be refreshing and being like, where are all the new stories? So we flipped it and we stopped having Zoninator power the top page for the apps, and that just goes to the most recently published stories, and that works a lot better. People think that we're updating the apps more often because now they're getting to see the stories that we have published more frequently, as opposed to kind of like the magazine or newspaper layout that you get when you just manage stories with Zoninator. So push alert tags, speaking of apps, are another way that we allow the stations to personalize the content experience for their users. We didn't want to make each station have the same push tags. WQAD in the Quad Cities does not need a traffic push tag, but KTLA does. So we have this plugin called Blimply, where we just create these tags and they automatically update in the native app, so we don't need to do any release when we want to add a new tag. The actual pushes themselves send via the Urban Airship API, who powers our pushes. The user is then notified that there are new push tags available, and the user chooses in the app which pushes they want to receive. So you can put, breaking news, contest programming, traffic, weather, and the user has the ability to go in and choose which ones they want. If any time a station decides that they have a new franchise or they want to take away one, all they have to do is let us know, we add the tag for them, and it shows up immediately for the user in the app. And at the bottom of every post in WordPress are post settings. This is the place where stations can manage articles on their most granular level. Everything from third-party copyright, updated timestamp, if a story displays in the app or the newsletter. If we want to add maps or related stories, this all happens in the post settings box. Internally, we just call them checkboxes, and they can be unwieldy. We rely on the producer that's posting the story to remember every time they're posting to say, oh, I need to mark this CNN wire. Oh, I need to hide the featured image from this one because I'm inserting a larger featured image and I want it to show up like that. We have evolved them a little bit by tabbing them into sections as opposed to the long lists that they used to be. But having a lot of post settings can help solve a lot of little problems. This is probably where station requests come most into play. And one of them is up there now. It's the don't show archive line. So after 9 months, a line is automatically added to the top of any story that says, this is an archived article. The information in the article may be outdated. Please look on the timestamp on the story to see when it was last updated. The reason that we have this is because there's a Keurig story, a Keurig recall story from 2014 that will not go away. Like, every December, someone thinks their Keurig is getting recalled. And then they share that on Facebook, and then that story goes wild. And then we have done everything is like changing the featured image to be like, this is old, and like adding the archive line, but it still shows up. So we were like, oh great, we're gonna add the archive line and it's gonna solve the Keurig problem. We'll see in December if it solves the Keurig problem. But then some stations said, well wait, we have some posts that we created in 2014 that are like where people upload photos or it's like some sort of sponsored thing, and we don't want that line that says the information is outdated on the top of it. So we're like, oh, well, that's a really good point. So that's when we created the checkbox to remove the archive line. A station requested it because we didn't think of it, and then we added it. Okay. Almost all of the content on our sites comes from the stations directly. There isn't a central content hub that is producing all of the stories on the sites. We do have an internal Tribune Media wire that produces and shares stories of national interest. We don't need 42 TV stations writing the same story when we could write it once and syndicate it out to those stations, and then they can get back to writing local content that they are really good at writing. So to illustrate how Tribune Media Wire works and how we syndicate across the stations, I asked our content and strategy manager, Scott Gustin, to show it to us, and we're going to play this video and see if it works.
Hi, I am here with Scott Gustin, our Manager of Content Strategy, and he is going to walk us through how we use content syndication to share stories with all of our stations. Scott?
Hey there. So internally we call it the Tribune Media Wire. It has an external name of Tribune Media Wire, sort of, but that's mainly just kind of our internal term for it. But I just want to show you real quick how it works for producers from the point of them sharing a story, wanting to share a story across our group, to the point where it actually ends up on one of our other sites. So let's take a look here. So we are looking at the Indianapolis station, a post that they created about a woman who canceled her wedding and then ended up hosting a reception for the homeless in place because she couldn't get her money back on her $30,000 wedding. So they write up the story, they put it on their site, and whether it's something that our team sees as doing really well or something they want to send to syndication, they just check this syndicate Tribune Media Wire checkbox over here, hit update, and that sends a copy of the post into our Tribune Media Wire WordPress site. And so once that story comes over here, it shows up as a new post in draft, and one of the editors can actually go in and make changes to that before we send it out to the group. So I've got the story here. It brings over the headline, the copy, really everything from that story. We've got the image, any video embed codes. This one does not have one, but it would bring that all over. We'll usually tweak copy to be a little bit more friendly for a national audience and not quite as local as the station might write it. And then over here on the right, we basically communicate to the station through the plugin, which I'll show you in a second, where this story comes from, and any additional notes that we might want to just let them know about the story. And this is something we can kind of update over time as well. So, and I'll show you in just a second where that actually displays for the station. So that's all here. Once we have this story ready to send out to the group, we'll just publish it to this kind of internal Tribune Media hosting site for the Tribune Media Wire. And what that does is actually power this plugin for the stations. So they'll open this up, and they will then see all of the latest posts that are available on our internal wire. And the story that we just talked about is the first one here. WGHP would just check this box, hit OK, and the page automatically loads the fields, and then you'll actually see it refresh because it's pulling in the actual featured image and a couple other things. So those editor's notes show right up here at the top. So immediately the producer can see anything that we're trying to communicate to them. If it's, do not change the headline or whatever we might want them to make sure that they do before they hit publish on this story can be communicated here. And then the story itself fills out. Here's the featured image, and then any metadata that we want to, attach to that story. If it's hiding a featured image, if it's a canonical, whatever it is, will also come over. So all the station then has to do is hit publish, and this story goes to their site. That is pretty much it. The stations then have to update the stories on their own once it's actually been published. An update to the Tribune Media Wire WordPress site doesn't actually update anything on the live sites at all. So it's really just a super easy way to give a story copy to the station for them to use. And then, of course, this is how it actually looks on the live site. Doesn't look any different. The stations give it the Tribune Media Wire author and share it on social. That's it.
Pretty easy. So we went from Indianapolis to our self-hosted Tribune Media Wire site to WGHB in Greensboro just by a couple clicks. You've got a team of people that are looking at the wire to see when people are adding stories or when you want to add stories to it, but it's not a very big team at all, really.
No, we have a West Coast editor and someone else on the East Coast that helps. And then we have a team of 3 people that are mostly focused on video, but they really don't use the WordPress site that much. They come in and help proof stories before we send them out to the group. We usually have several people just read things over before we actually send it out. And one thing I didn't mention is we actually, the way we communicate to the stations when a story has been added to the wire is they just subscribe to that Tribune Media Wire blog. So we have like 350 subscribers to there, so it actually shows up as a post on that internal WordPress site. So that's how they're actually notified of a new story that's available, and then they know to go into the plugin and actually grab it. So
awesome. Well, thanks for showing us how it works.
Cool.
Bye, Scott.
Bye.
Bye, Scott. So Scott mentioned how editors get an email when a new story is available, and this is what the email looks like, which probably looks familiar to a lot of you because quite literally it is really just subscribing to the blog and then getting the email that the new story is available. Since really all you were doing is subscribing as a follower to our Tribune Media Wire site. Because we have so many people posting to the sites at all different skill levels, we would find that sometimes the quality of the post would suffer. It didn't happen often, but sometimes a story would go out without a headline, or like Rebecca mentioned, a bunch of random HTML code from a copy and paste. So we implemented the Publishing Checklist plugin to help identify where a story needed help before it was published. We also use this to send articles off to Facebook Instant Articles. If a story is 6 out of 6 on the checklist, then it qualifies to be published as Facebook IA, so that also automates that process for us. So like I mentioned earlier, we have nearly 2,000 WordPress users. Web producers, anchors, reporters, news directors, creative service directors, corporate digital, developers, freelancers, photographers, receptionists, like anyone could, depending on the station, have access to their site. So we needed a simple way to manage all the different levels of access people would need, and also how we could organize and display those users that needed visibility to the public. So on one of the early days in our new platform, one of the early days in our new platform when a web producer at our station reset the entire back end of the site, that was the day that we decided we needed custom user roles. And I'm glad it happened early. We still wanted to allow some users at the station level to have authority, but maybe not let them poke around where we enable plugins or delete everything that's in the VIP settings. So web managers and many web team members at the station level get something called the station administrator level. They can see just about anything except for tools, our ad code management system, and basically anything under the VIP tab. Most other users are given the editor role, and remember, originally, everyone at the station, which I'll talk about in a minute here, had to have a login to accommodate the people page. So many of the stations have people listed as just author or contributor because they never actually need to get into WordPress to do anything. We just needed to have them as users so we could put their names up for a byline, or we needed to display them on the news team page. Here's the news team page. People pages are really important to TV stations. These pages list the on-air talent and how people can get a hold of reporters and anchors and give them story tips. Initially, we just pulled in gravatars that populated the people page. So like I mentioned just a minute ago, this meant that everyone from the 65-year-old evening anchor to the right out of college intern or reporter needed a WordPress login. And that kind of worked for a while until the reporter needed to change their bio, but they'd never actually logged into WordPress before, and they didn't have their password, and they didn't remember which email address they used to sign up for their username. So, and then as we started adding people to our team, we would add them as users to the site, and then they would start showing up on the people pages. So randomly, our developer would show up on the KDVR people page. And it's oh, look, you're the new reporter at our Denver TV station. So then we'd have to go in and individually remove them from all of the people pages so that they wouldn't show up anymore. Now most of the stations use a combination of guest authors and a zoninator zone that we created. So they can create guest authors. The web team has control over headshots and bios. And plus, by using a zoninator, they don't have to rely on people being listed alphabetically. They can move those people that have been at the station for the longest up at the top because they're the people that the viewers recognize. And then also we can now invite people to the site without having to go back in and remove them. This is KDVR's people page, and yes, it includes a dog. That's Zipper. He's a service dog that they're following through a screen. So they put him on the people page. When it comes to simply managing how the sites look, and specifically what makes our station in Milwaukee maybe look different than our station in Richmond, we implemented what we call station settings in our ad code manager. These are the areas of the site where we can make quick but important changes without having to wait for a WordPress deploy and then potentially a WordPress revert if it didn't work the way we wanted it to. So station settings is really where the sites become themselves. Everything from logos to theme to ad code to legal links, social links, what authors display on the people page, live stream schedule, that all happens in this section. I could go on to ktla.com, go to their station settings, change the station code right there to say WITI in Milwaukee, and in an instant, KTLA is going to look like WITI in Milwaukee, except it's going to still have all of KTLA's content in it. Station settings control so much of what happens on the sites. What makes the Des Moines radar load instead of Houston's, to even what Facebook page loads in the footer of our sites. So no ads would run on our sites, which would maybe make some people happy, and some people very unhappy, if we didn't use Ad Code Manager. Ads on our sites are tied to categories and pages. TV stations like to sell sponsorships. So anytime a new category or a static page is created, we also create a line in Ad Code Manager that inserts the correct ads onto that page. So like the first one there says Spoken Dreams. They create a new category called Spoken Dreams. We have to go in and add that line so that the ads load correctly on that new category page. Like I mentioned earlier, we have nearly 2,000 WordPress users working across all time zones, different shifts, different roles. Like I mentioned before, they're not all web producers. They could hold any role at a TV station, and with all different skill levels. So as we roll out the tools that we talked about today, or change them or update them, we had to find a way to communicate effectively. For support tickets from the web producers, we do use Zendesk. And like I mentioned earlier, that slide of all the people sitting around the table, those are the people that basically answer the Zendesk tickets. We never really have to worry about support in the after hours or the weekends, because the great thing about WordPress is that it always works. So we've managed to last from 2013 to now with a pretty lean support team answering the WordPress tickets. We only kind of just recently added someone on the West Coast so we could support our West Coast stations a little bit more. But all things considered, it's been pretty easy. One of our biggest challenges has been how can we quickly and effectively communicate a single message to a large group of very busy people who have 85 tabs open, who maybe don't like going into Facebook, who don't check in their email, but we know the one place that they are is their WordPress dashboard. So we didn't want the burden of emails, and some of the other communication methods weren't quick enough, and we couldn't guarantee that people would see them in a timely fashion. So Scott mentioned earlier that if something changes in a Tribune Media Wire story, it doesn't change on the station site. So say 15 minutes after we post a story about the bride, we realize that her name is spelled wrong. Now, we could send an email, we could post in our Facebook group, we could add notes to the story, but we also use something that we created called network notifications, which puts a message at the top of everyone's WordPress dashboard. This is updated through a site hosted on our server. We use a custom post type. It looks just like a post. You give it a headline and some copy, and anyone logged into one of our WordPress dashboards will see this message across the top. So if they need to make a change to a story, if someone claimed the rights to a video that we're using and we need to take it down, anything that we need to like immediately communicate to someone that's really editorially focused, we put in network notifications. You can set expirations on them, or you can trash them. It works just like a post. Like I said, other communication methods weren't fast enough. You can see some examples that we've used before, like there's an extra hymn in that story. These two videos maybe got taken down. Oh, we have a better video for the elephant story. We'll send all those up in network notifications, and then anyone that's logged in can see them. We started a Facebook group for our web producers back in 2011 when we asked them, do you guys get too many emails from us? And they said yes. And then we decided to start this group for non-urgent updates. Anytime we create something new for the sites, we'll post it to the Facebook group. So like this is an example. We add the functionality to add like related stories. So in addition to putting it in like knowledge base, which again, like Rebecca said, who goes to the knowledge base, or sending it in an email where it might get lost, we put it in the Facebook group, and hopefully that's an easy place for our web producers to see it. I can add like images to it so they can see how it works. They can comment on it if they have a question about it. If one of our vendors is down, the Facebook group is where we put the alert that we know something is up so that we don't get 85 of the same Zendesk ticket saying that XYZ is down. It's also where stations can share stories that they think are doing well on other sites, or they can also collaborate on story of national interest. Blah, talk about the eclipse. A web producer can go into the Facebook group and say, hey, if you're in the path of totality, what are you guys doing for your coverage? And then there can be a whole conversation that corporately we don't have to facilitate. They can, have that whole conversation themselves. And then another way we communicate with all of our web producers is with our web producer calls. We hold them every other Wednesday, and anyone at the station who wants to join in can, but it's mostly web producers and then some news directors. It's a video conference call, so we like to say that you have to have your camera on, but that doesn't always happen. But we did that because we know working in a newsroom that people will get on a group call, and then they'll put the headset on their shoulder, and then they'll be like typing the other stories, and then like they're not really listening to what's going on over here because they're listening to the scanner over here. I'm not saying that that doesn't happen with the video, but at least we can see where everyone's eyes are pointed during the call. the corporate digital team sets the agenda, so it can be release notes, updates, reminders, demos. We've had guest speakers on. We do web producer presentations, and then like open time for questions. Sometimes these are like 5 minutes long, and it's just like, hey, we changed the way that you upload the featured image. Okay, that's it. Bye, guys. Have a great rest of the week. Sometimes they last longer, and it's people asking a lot of questions about a new tool that we released, or we want to work with a third party, and they're demoing the product for us so we can see if the web producers are interested in it. Every call is recorded, both audio and video. We type up the web notes and, again, save them in the pit that is the knowledge base that hopefully people look at. And then these are just a selection of the people that make it happen, just a snapshot of some of our web teams from all of our stations across the country that do the hard work, that take the tools that we put together, and they make great content, and they're available as a resource in their community, and we really wouldn't be anywhere without these folks. So that's it from me. If you've got any questions, I've been told to use the mic.
Well, thank you, Megan. It was great to see how Tribune Media is working. Really, really great stuff. So questions, I'll come around with mics. So, one second.
Integrating with, ENPS. So we don't use ENPS. We have a proprietary newsroom system that we use that's not currently integrated with that. There has always been a lot of discussion about that. So like, just like send to the site, but it's not currently part of it.
So, yes. Hold on, let me bring the mic over.
Hello, Megan.
Hi, Whitney.
We were
Not a
former
plan.
coworkers from like a decade ago, so I have questions. So how are the sites structured? So are you running like one parent theme, and then each station or each property has their own child theme that can get individual updates?
Yeah.
You have like one record of truth theme?
Right. So there's like one theme called like the local TV. It's called local TV just because it came over from the old site. That is more or less the same gist. You're going to get the same header. You're going to get the same look. And then we just upload different, colors and logos to the site. And then in station settings, when I put in KTLA or WITI, something gets called and says, oh, let me go find everything that belongs to them. And then they pulls it up and displays it in the theme.
So when you're doing things like, let's say a station requests a specific post setting that you have to do, is that something, do you have a process for evaluating if you roll that same setting out to everybody, or if it's just individual to Kansas City or Denver or whatever?
Yeah, we do like deploy by democracy. We ask people in the web calls, we send out an email to all the web producers, and we say, hey, what if we did this instead? Like KTLA will make a request and say, it would be really great if the captions for every story that I put in a post were bolded and italic because that's our style. That's just a made-up example. And then I'll go in the web group or the web call and say, does everyone want all their captions now to be bold italics because we've got a request for it? And if most of the people say, yeah, that's something that wouldn't bother us, or if someone else says, no, we can't do that because XYZ, then we say, sorry, we can't do it if there's enough people that say that they don't want it.
One last question, which is, how do you manage elections on such a grand scale?
Emotionally?
In like a 30, yeah. Like, other than the Xanax prescription, like, are you, like, in 30 seconds, tell me how you manage elections. Good luck.
Okay. So we have a really great team. It's just now a team of 2 who does like our full stack development and makes election widgets for us. So newsrooms have a lot of different election systems that they use to pull in the data. They're using like the AP, or they're putting in manually, or they're pulling in feeds. The gist of it is all those systems are going to export like an XML file. So we take that XML file and we put in a nice little chart, and then we just iframe that and then just put that on a page. And that'll work on both desktop and mobile. And it's more or less the same for everybody. Like back in the day, we had some people that were using like publishing in a Google Doc or Google spreadsheet to share their election results. But we've kind of standardized that across the group.
Exactly.
I just want to clarify, do all of the sites have their own instance, so they're each logging into their own site? It's not like a universal dash, right?
Yeah, they're all logging into like their own site, and they don't have like, they can't like navigate to or access. There's not like a network of being able to get to the other sites. Right. Thanks. Oh.
What technologies do you use to get stories out of WordPress and into your apps?
We use a custom API that just flows all the stories directly in there. Anything that gets published on the site in WordPress goes directly to the apps that were built for us by, we use an agency in Chicago called Punchcake Interactive that developed them for us. And then there is a station setting, or there is a checkbox where if for whatever reason you don't want a story to go to the app, you can check it off and it just reads that meta and it doesn't send it out.
Hi. It seems like you're using mostly WordPress VIP plugins to do things. Do you use any third-party software as a service for any of your?
I mean, yeah, like our video is a third-party service, but you know, like the beauty and sometimes the struggle with the VIP is that there are only a certain amount of plugins that you can use because they have to be approved by VIP to go onto our site, which is great because then we know that they're always going to work. You know, there have been instances where we know that a WordPress plugin exists out in the wild, and if we want to use it, we are like, oh, well, let's send it up to WordPress and see if we can get it VIP approved, but we do mostly, either we build it ourselves or we use the VIP version of it.
So I think we have time for one more.
What do you use for analytics? And can you see across all of the sites, or do they each do it individually?
We use Google Analytics. The stations themselves they have the opportunity to look at a group view, so they can see the top, like in a real-time view, what stories are doing well for all the stations, and then they can look at just their instance. And then for us, we have the ability to look at a rolled-up view in Google Analytics to see how everyone is doing throughout the day.
Awesome. Thanks, Megan. Another round of applause for Megan.